Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Hidden Histories Collective. We're really excited about this particular one because we have been talking so much about American Indians and our status in this country and our history. And sometimes it can be a bit of an uphill battle because we're fighting and pushing up against the narrative of the day. But I think this book is going to really help to put some things out there and to start having different conversations and having some really important ones. Now, some of you may be familiar with this particular book that I'm about to show you, and I hope that you are because it's going to be an important series that we're going to be putting together around this book, which is about 800 pages. And I'm really, really excited to talk about this book today. It is called America, being the latest and most accurate description of the New World. And the title is actually longer than that, but that is the essence of the book. And it was published in 1671 by a man by the name of John Ogilby. And one of the things about Ogilby, he's a pretty fascinating character. He had been a poet, he had been a writer, he had been a dancer, he had been many different things. And there was a lot of books written about him as well. But when he sat down and he wrote this book, he hadn't really written it from scratch. It was actually a translation and a compilation of earlier sources, mostly from the Dutch, Spanish, and Portuguese accounts. And so, in essence, Ogilvy was more of a publisher slash translator than a field researcher. So, but even that was pretty extensive because, like I said, the book was about 800 pages. And the illustrations and maps in America were often adapted from earlier 16th and 17th century works. So the book itself wasn't really new, but much of it was of the content was reflected observations from the 1500s and 1600s. And so on the left here, this is various pictures of John Ogilvy or sketches of John Ogilvy, the man who put this book together. Now, the thing about John Ogilby was he had a semi-official title of a cosmographer to King Charles II. And as you guys know, King Charles II and other kings and queens of the day, many of them were melanated people. Yes, they were. Um, but King Charles II, most of the images you see of him has him looking very Italian looking, but he is actually a melanated man. And the woman right next to him is his wife, Katherine. And as you can see, she's clearly melanated too. But in essence, Ogilvy was putting together this particular book for the king, and he produced books like this. They were very lavish atlases and travel books, and often they were translations and adaptations of, like I said earlier, Dutch, Spanish, and Portuguese sources. So America was just one of the books that he had put together. He also had done other books that was part of a series called Asia and one called Africa, which I will be referencing later on in the presentation here. But as you can see in this particular picture, Ogilby is presenting one of those books to King Charles II in a very formal way. Now, books like this that Ogilby had put together were very expensive, and they were really for the elite and wealthy patrons and libraries and officials who wanted prestige, knowledge of the world. And so Ogilby was known for doing these types of books. Now, America in particular, when you guys go to archive.org and you look for this book, I'll also have the link of it in the description. But when you go to archive.org and you get more information about the book, you'll see that it was actually uploaded by the Smithsonian. So the Smithsonian I would guess still has this book if they had scanned it and made it available to the public. So, as you and I know, the Smithsonian does carry and hold a lot of information and data that they release, and sometimes they don't. But this book in particular, they actually did upload it. I don't know if they still have the copy or if they had it or had it on loan themselves. Who knows? But somewhere out there, someone has uh, this book. But in essence, the reason why the book America was so important was because England was in a fierce rivalry with both Spain and the Dutch for colonial dominance in the Americas. And so publishing a massive authoritative book such as this on the quote unquote New World helped to assert England's intellectual and cultural stake in America. And so by doing that, they were able to show, well, here they were telling the world, here, oh, here's what we know about America. We've been there. We know so much about this place. And so when you see these images, pay really, really special attention to the social standing of, I guess you could say, the Aboriginal. As you could see in this particular sketch, there were many slaves surrounding this particular Aboriginal, and they weren't African slaves, as you can see. Now, one of the things about the book that Ogilby put together shows America as being a very ancient land. And when you really look at the photography, or I guess you can say not photography, the sketches and illustrations and engravings in the book, you'll notice that there's some very deep cultural continuity that probably goes back 600 to 1,000 years earlier, or at least to the 8th to 10th century, sometimes much further. And for instance, the Maya and Andean civilizations go back 2,000 plus years. So when you look through the illustrations, you'll see that this was a very, very established society and had been for some time. And I have provided some of the illustrations here in the presentation, but not all of them because I don't want to take anyone's thunder away, because there's so much to discover in this book. And there are at least 75 plus images, if not more, for you guys to really comb through. Now, when we talk about the Americas, and this is where I want to make some points here. Again, this book is nearly 800 pages long, with sections on Carolina, on Florida, the Yucatan, Guatemala, Honduras, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and more. So when you think of that, you think of the volume, the content in this book, you're talking about many different territories and areas that made up North America. Now, here's the thing. Think about this, and we've said this often, but I'm saying this on the record for the Hidden Histories Collective and our video presentations, is that when you think of all these territories, they were already inhabited by many, many, many indigenous peoples, millions. Okay. So when we talk about the transatlantic, let me get that right, transatlantic slave trade, what are we talking about? Right? And I'm just putting that question out there. I know this isn't the topic of this presentation, but it has to be said and it has to be noted that this particular book highlights that these were established countries, right? Established territories, I should say. And this whole concept of the slave trade puts everything in a very, very different light. And one of the things that you know, we want to stress here is that, every page, when you go through this book, every page describes the people already living in these lands, farming, building towns, governing, and trading. So when you think about a country, North America, being inhabited and being in existence for centuries, you have to begin to say to yourself, well, what role did the transatlantic slave trade really play in this particular territory called North America? How many people were actually shipped here et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to pose some questions for you guys in a minute too, as well, and show you some numbers. And here we go, slavery by the numbers. Now, I want to just put this out there for everyone to think about, because when we talk about slavery, only the African is referred to. Now, many of the quote unquote slaves, or they call them indentured servants, were Europeans that came in the 1600s to the 1700s. And the approximate number was about 350,000 to 400,000. And they were mainly transported to North America and the Caribbean. And what is the name of the book? It is called, I forget the name of it, that White Cargo. If you guys read that book, it goes into a lot more detail about the quote unquote Europeans in the white slave trade. But I want to even go further back. I mean, white slavery has been around since, gosh, the period of the ancient Moors. So white slavery isn't anything new, and they certainly didn't begin taking or shipping white slaves to North America first. But I just want to put that number out there for you guys. And then they also shipped East Indians to the Caribbean, primarily approximately 500,000 from the period of 1838 to 1917, when the slave trade was after the slave trade was abolished by England. And then, of course, there's the infamous number of the Africans who had been shipped to various parts of North America from the 1500s to 1807. Now, of course, the formal date of slavery, I guess you can say 1619, with the 20 Africans that they referred to. So, looking at these numbers, it's still pretty stark, right? And again, I'm going to say North America already had millions of indigenous people living and inhabiting the territory. But I haven't even crunched the numbers to talk about how many slave ships were on the ocean at any given time and how many they had to carry to make this number. That's a whole nother video. But I just wanted to show you guys these numbers so that you could crunch these numbers even yourself. So again, as we talk about slavery by the numbers, I pose this question: if the Americas were already full of indigenous peoples, does it make sense that millions of Africans had to be shipped to the various regions? Ogilby's book forces us to confront this contradiction. And when you see these people, they're dark-skinned people, right? And I'm going to get even deeper with that as we move on here. And I just want to show you again some images from the book, some illustrations from the book, so that you can see the people that were sketched and drawn. And clearly, this man here has curly hair and he's dark. Just being really real. Okay. Some more images and illustrations. Yeah, here we go. And so when you see this book in its totality, it really, I don't want to say it's overwhelming. Yeah, I guess you can say it's overwhelming because you're seeing so much in your face and you can't even deny it anymore. Now, again, I know many of you are familiar with this book. You've heard of this book, you've seen the images from this book, and you probably have it in your collection. But for those who aren't familiar with it, it's an incredible, incredible study. Now, here's another image of the illustration was called Novo Mexico. And in other words, if we were to translate it, would be considered New Mexico. But New Mexico wasn't necessarily the territory that we know as New Mexico. It was actually this, a large swath of the Southwest. And so cities like, forgive me for my pronunciation, cities like Cholula and it's a Palapa and the great Pueblo towns of the Southwest were all designed, built, and maintained by indigenous peoples. And they had stone temples, palaces, marketplaces, aqueducts, irrigation systems, and planned streets. All of this. And this is just one of the cities, just one of them. So again, established and maintained cities and towns by indigenous peoples. Okay. Now, some people will look at these illustrations and say, they look African to me. That's what people will say, right? Now, my response, in America, Ogilby never uses the term African. Never. He never uses the term African. And when you guys go to archive.org and you download it directly from the website, you can do a search in the document and you won't ever see the word African. He does not describe these people as African. His descriptors are consistent. He calls the indigenous people Americans, Floridans, guys, forgive me, the Mexicans, the native inhabitants, the Peruvians, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to make that note here because sometimes people will say things, well, they look African and they were African. Now, keep in mind, yes, the Spaniards and Europeans, they did bring Africans over with them in the early part of the 15th century. And when they started really coming with regularity, because we know they were coming to conquer. But in terms of the number, the slave trade, the quote unquote slave trade wasn't official per se. So when Ogilby writes and puts together this book, he's putting together the book not just based on his perceptions, but on what he has in front of him based on the Dutch and the Portuguese and the Spaniards, what everyone else has been saying. So he's not even calling anyone African because they're not African. Now, here's where it gets interesting. And here is where you will find and see where the term Negro came from and why they begin to call us Negro. Now, in the 17th century, Negroland, or what they would call the land of Negroes, or sometimes they would call the land of the Blacks, it was a European term that they used, and they put this on maps and atlases. And it was used primarily by the Portuguese, Dutch, and later by Ogilby when he wrote his 1670 volume called Africa to describe West Africa, which stretched from Senegal to Nigeria, as you can see on this map. Okay. So it was a section of quote unquote Africa that they called Negroland. See? Now, Negroland didn't mean one kingdom, but a whole belt of territory Europeans associated with the quote unquote Black peoples. And on maps, you'll often see it placed just below the Sahara, okay, covering the Sahel region. Now, when Ogilby wrote Africa, the book, because there was another book, and I'm also going to create, not create, but I'm going to include the link of that book as well, which is almost, I think it's a little over, it may be over 900 pages, I think that one is. Now, in Ogilby's Africa, the full title includes the land of Negroes, Guinea, Ethiopia, where Negroland is broadly applied. So, so think of it from this perspective. Ogilby writes America, which is a whole different set of people. Then he writes Africa, which is again another whole set of people. But by the time we start reaching into the, the areas of the slave trade, that's when people just start calling folks Negroes, right? They just, anybody who had dark skin was a Negro. Now, yeah, I want to talk about the importance of this book. And I know I'm doing a really kind of quick overview of this because there's so much to, of course, unpack in this particular book. And we're going to be doing a series, as I mentioned. But the thing about Ogilvy's book, which we can surely appreciate as historians and people who are studying our culture, is that we see dark skinned people and stone towns with plazas, gardens, and waterways. Like it's all there in front of us. And now, keep in mind, these weren't European cities. These were not European cities. They were indigenous cities built centuries before the conquest. So pretty much everything that we now see today was already here. It was already here. Um, and so when we think about the Europeans coming here, they didn't create these cities. They conquered them, erased them, and then rebuilt on top of them. And that's a whole different conversation to have. But when you begin to study the cities and you begin to study the architecture and the archaeology, you'll really be able to see what happened. And that many of the buildings that we see, particularly the historical ones, they've been repurposed. Now, again, in Ogilby's 1671 America the book, it preserves what the conquerors themselves first saw: American Aboriginals, Indians living in civilizations as advanced as any in Europe. So I know this was a really quick overview of the book, but I just wanted to give you guys this information to set the tone for many different things, because people will continually tell us that we're African. They'll say it again and again and again. But in this particular context, at least back in the 16th and 17th century, when Ogilby had written these books, particularly America and Africa, there were two different and distinct territories, two distinct countries, continents, what have you. And it's really, really important to note that. So again, I'm going to provide the link to both books, the America as well as Africa, so that you guys have those. And then at a later date, we'll be diving into the books and really talking about specific territories and the things that were observed during that time. So again, thank you all so much for tuning in, for checking this out. And please, if you have the time, just go to our website and check it out and join our mailing list. We'll be sending out some communication pretty soon here for everyone to stay connected. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and we will be talking to you guys shortly. And yes, look forward to that particular presentation on the Native American tribes and the federal budget cuts that are coming down the pipe. Okay, I'll talk to you guys soon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.